Radio. Hey, I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It is Sunday, June 30th. June is gone. June is out of here. We are halfway through the year. We know summer started on June 21st as well. I think it was the summer solstice. So we are live tonight. We have a lot to talk about on tonight's show. You know, last week I talked some about the HR40 reparations bill. Okay, the hearing that took place in the House Judiciary Committee. And last week I did not get a chance to talk about the GI Bill and the history of the GI Bill and how the GI Bill discriminated against African American soldiers, okay, and benefited white soldiers. There's a long history behind this, all right? So we know that, in the first segment tonight, we'll talk about why didn't the GI Bill benefit African-American soldiers. And this is part of the argument for reparations for the legacy of slavery. And then this past week, Wednesday and Thursday, we know that we had the Democratic primary debates, okay, presidential candidate debates. And they were Wednesday and Thursday. We know there are 25 candidates running for president right now. And they had so many candidates, they had to split it up into two nights. So many people have been talking about this past week, but they've been talking about Thursday night. And Thursday night you had Vice President Joe Biden, Senator Bernie Sanders, you had Senator Kamala Harris. And going into that debate, we know on last Sunday's show, we talked about how people like Senator Cory Booker, Senator Elizabeth Warren, and others were attacking Vice President Joe Biden about comments that he made at a private fundraising dinner regarding working with segregationists in the U.S. Senate in the 1970s. So Biden became a U.S. Senator. He started serving in the U.S. Senate in 1973. And this is what he was dealing with when he got there, right? So on last Sunday's show, I played a segment of an interview that Reverend Al Sharpton did on Sunday, June 23rd with Joe Biden. And Joe Biden explained to Reverend Al Sharpton directly, face to face, how people were mischaracterizing what he said. Well, people act like that interview didn't even take place. And then the mischaracterizations from people like Cory Booker, people like Senator Kamala Harris, and even Reverend Al Sharpton continued this week. So I'm going to dig into this because what happened Thursday night, we know it was calculated. But also, it was a mischaracterization of what Joe Biden said about working with two segregationist senators. But at the same time, as Representative Cedric Richmond, who is the co-chair of Vice President Joe Biden's campaign, as he said today on Katie Thurs' show on MSNBC, okay, I mean, not Katie Thurs, KC. KC, what's Casey's last name? I forgot her name. She comes on 7 p.m., okay, on MSNBC. He talked about how Senator Kamala Harris and Cory Booker, who vehemently oppose Donald Trump, had to work with Donald Trump to get the First Step Act signed into law, that they brag about getting signed into law. So in the second hour, I'm going to dig deep into this, because that was some fragganackle bull. Seriously, if you actually understand the history, that was some BS. And if you go back and watch the show from last week, it's on our Facebook fan page, the African History Network. It's on my YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep. I broke this down last week and showed how it was disingenuous. When you got Cory Booker, who's so sensitive and crying about the usage of the word boy, but Senator Joe Biden explained to Reverend Al Sharpton that the usage of the term boy, that wasn't dealing with black men. That was dealing with white men. So the whole way people are jumping on this and focusing on two words, segregationist and boy, and running away with this is totally disingenuous. If you have criticism of Biden's actual voting policies, voting record, things like that, that's fine. But to just blatantly lie about what he said to push your own agenda, see, that's disingenuous. So then when we look at Cory Booker, last week, Cory Booker was polling at 4%. The day before the Wednesday debate, Steve Kornacki on MSNBC came out with the new numbers. Cory Booker dropped to 2.3%. Cory Booker is now jumping on Biden about a comment Biden made at the Rainbow Push Coalition meeting that took place on Friday, either Friday, and then jumping on the usage of the word hoodie. But at the same time, Cory Booker talks about how he lives in the hood and what goes on in the hood. But he objects to Joe Biden using the word hoodie. If you actually look at this stuff, one is disingenuous. Two, it's a distraction. Three, it's ridiculous. And then how Cory Booker is talking about how he's so hurt. If you go back and watch the show I did last week, because I broke this stuff down. More evidence has come out this week. But I broke this down last week. And I said, if Cory Booker is so hurt by the usage of the word boy, and he's a black man running for president in America, and America is 63% white, he might as well hang it up right now. But we're going to get deep in this tonight, and then at the bottom of the hour, we're going to be joined by Dr. Ola. Dr. Ola is the founder of UACO, and they have their annual African Unity Day festival that's coming up Thursday, July 4th, 2019 at Eliza Howell Park in Detroit. So that's 11 a.m. to 8 p.m. And I'll be there as well once again this year. I'll have a vendor table. Come on out. It's a great day of unity among continental Africans, Caribbeans, African Americans. There's free food. I mean, it's a great time. There's entertainment. So we'll have Dr. Ola on at the bottom of the hour to talk about this, all right? Okay, so I got to jump into this because we only have 2 hours here, and we're coming up on a break in a minute, and I got a lot of information to cover, all right? But I have the evidence. The interviews that Al Sharpton did, the interview that Al Sharpton did with Joe Biden. And then Al Sharpton interviewed Representative Cedric Richmond. Cedric Richmond explained all this stuff, and he explained it accurately. And people act like these interviews don't exist. They just want to push their own narrative. So then you have to ask the question, well, what's behind all this? Why are people acting like the explanation doesn't even exist? And see one of the most disingenuous things is that the two segregationist senators that Joe Biden was talking about working with were both Democrats. The two segregationist senators, one from Georgia, one from Mississippi. Okay? Senator James Eastland from Mississippi, chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee. And Joe Biden served on the Senate Judiciary Committee. So if you want to get anything done in the Senate Judiciary Committee, you got to work with the chairman. The whole way that they're characterizing this is disingenuous. Once again, if you have disagreements with Biden on actual votes or actual policies he pushed in the past or policies he's pushing now, that's legitimate. What's not legitimate is to lie, blatantly lie to people as well. Okay? All right, on the African History Network show, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world, because right knowledge corrects wrong behavior. What you do for yourself, what you do to yourself, and what you allow other people to do to you and get away with is based upon what you think about yourself. What you think about yourself is based upon what you have been taught about yourself. What you've been taught about yourself is based upon everything you've read, heard, and seen about yourself. So when you control the radius of a man's thoughts, you can control the circumference of his actions, because the mind can't do or teach what it doesn't know. Now, we deal with a number of different topics here on the show. We deal with current events, history, politics, education, economic empowerment, entrepreneurship, relationships, love, sex, health issues, and much, much more. Sign up for our email newsletter. Text the word Kemet, K-E-M-E-T. Text the word Kemet, K-E-M-E-T, to 22828 to sign up for our email newsletter. Also visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Be sure to register for my new online course. We meet again on Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, online. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa. Understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa. Understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. This is a 8-week, 16-hour online course. We do it live. All the sessions are recorded. As soon as you register, you can start watching the, last week's class. We also have 36 hours of bonus content. The course is on sale, $80. Watch from around the world. Watch as many times as you want to. Okay, visit AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com for more information and to register. All right, so when we look at the GI Bill. Now, last week I shared an excerpt of Dr. Julian Malveaux. Dr. Julian Malveaux is an economist, and she testified at the House Judiciary Committee hearing dealing with reparations on Wednesday, June 19th, on Juneteenth. And she talked about not just slavery, but a history of policies that have maldistributed wealth, power, and resources into the hands of, away from African Americans into the hands of the dominant white society. And one of the programs she talked about was the GI Bill, okay? Now, interesting enough, June 22nd was the anniversary of the signing of the GI Bill, okay, which was signed into law June 22nd, 1944, okay, by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And this was part of the New Deal. Okay, this was this was during World War II, and this was after the Great Depression, and this was a bill dealing with veterans, especially World War II veterans, and providing funding for them, providing aid for them for when they come back home. All right, so. This was the last of the sweeping New Deal reforms, and President Roosevelt's administration created the GI Bill, officially called the Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944. The Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944, hoping to avoid a relapse into the Great Depression after the war ended. So President Roosevelt particularly wanted to prevent a repeat of the bonus march of 1932 during the Great Depression, when 20,000 unemployed veterans and their families flocked in protest to Washington, D.C. Okay, this all deals with history. Okay, and this deals with how conditions create historical events. Policies are put in place to address the historical events. Those policies then create conditions, and then you have a response to those conditions, which then result in policies being put in place to respond to the response to the conditions. So you have a cycle. Okay, this all deals with policy, conditions, economics. All right, so the American Legion, which is a veterans organization, successfully fought for many of the provisions included in the GI Bill, okay, the Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944. So the American Legion successfully fought for many of the provisions included in the bill, which gave returning servicemen access to unemployment compensation, low interest home and business loans, and most importantly, funding for education. Now, what this is going to do is this government program is going to totally change the landscape of higher education in this country, and is going to allow people who never before thought they could go to college, is going to allow them to go to college, get a degree, go into a profession, go move into the middle class, buy homes out in the suburbs, okay, and and accumulate wealth for their family. Do we have to understand what politics is? Politics is the legal distribution of scarce wealth, power, and resources, and the writing of laws, statutes, ordinances, amendments, and treaties, their adoption, interpretation, and enforcement. You listen to 910 AM, the Superstation, the Future Radio on Michael Imhotep, the African History Network show. We'll be back in a few minutes.
Medicare plan? Are you sure?
And then we got your guest on.
Many people with Medicare
okay.
are eligible
Well, tell them
for
it's not.
plans that
I'm bringing them on at
include
9:30 though.
extra benefits in addition to
But
those
let me
found
see.
in
Hold on. Let me see
original
what
Medicare.
we want to do.
Benefits like dental, vision, and prescription drug
I
coverage.
could bring
Call
them
now to
on
see if
now.
you're
Oh,
eligible
when we
to
come back from the
enroll.
break,
The
I'll go ahead and bring
consultation is
them
free
on.
with no
That's right.
obligation to enroll. In addition to hospital
All right.
and
How's everybody doing? Stand by,
no
everybody.
extra cost, you can also get
Stand by.
coverage for prescription drugs, dental,
Hello?
hearing, vision, and more. In
Hey,
many
we're gonna
areas,
begin on-
plans with
getting you
benefits
on
are
the air after
available
the
with
break
$0
here, all right?
copays for many services, $0
Awesome.
monthly
Thank you.
premiums, or $0 deductible. That's hospital, medical, prescription drug, dental coverage, and more, included in one plan with premiums that may be as low as $0 a month. Call now to see if you're eligible to enroll. The consultation is free, and there's no obligation to enroll.
Call 1-800-571-8580. That's 1-800-571-8580.
Stand by, everybody. We'll be back in a couple minutes here, okay?
1 minute.
Or hit with high interest rates? A low credit score happens to many of us, and millions of people are victims of incorrect items on their credit reports and don't even know it. That's why you need credit repair now. Our proven process has resulted in past clients seeing on average 11 negative items removed from their credit report and a 40-point increase after the first 4 months in our program. Call now and request your credit report and credit score for free in minutes.
Call
How's everybody doing?
1-800-729-9197.
Got Mimi,
Listen up,
Esther.
America.
30.
Are you or a loved one suffering with an addiction to alcohol, opiates, prescription painkillers, or other drugs? There is hope. Medication-assisted treatment is proven
Everybody
most
share this
effective
broadcast
for
on your
opiate
Facebook
addiction
page. Invite your
recovery.
friends to tune in.
15.
Using medications
Okay.
such as methadone, Suboxone, and Subutex, combined with inpatient treatment, you can achieve lasting recovery. Most insurance is accepted,
5,
so call
4,
us now.
3,
Please call
2, 1.
800-625-5860.
Welcome back to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM, the Superstation, the Future Radio. Hey, I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It is Sunday, June 30th, 2019, and we are live. Hope everybody's doing well tonight. The 19th Annual United African Community Organization, which stands for UWACO, the 19th Annual African Unity Festival is taking place Thursday, July 4th, 2019 at Eliza Howell Park in Detroit, Michigan. And we are bringing him back on the show tonight to talk about it. Dr. Ola from UWACO. How you doing tonight, brother?
Yes, how are you, Mr. Mike? Thank you for your teaching. It's very educational. Thank you so much.
All right, Dr. Ola. Absolutely. Good to have you back on. All right, so it's that time of the year again, and this year is going by quickly. July 4th is coming up, and everybody's looking forward to what UWACO has planned for this year for the 19th Annual African Unity Festival, right? So tell us, what's going to take place this Thursday?
Say that again?
Tell everybody what is going to take place this Thursday.
Oh, this Thursday, there is a celebration of the American independence by the Africans that is born in the diaspora and the Africans that is born in the homeland. They all come together to celebrate this, most especially in the African way. We have authentic African music, the playing and the soccer game, and we have a lot of artifacts, African drama, African functions, everything you think. The unique thing about this festival is that everything you get in this festival is authentic African.
Okay, authentic African. Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so
History books, things like that.
Okay, so there'll be vendors, there'll be history books. I know soccer is huge in Africa, and you all have soccer teams that are playing from different African countries. Tell people about this, because, people have to come out to actually see this. I'm amazed by it each year. Tell people about what's going to take place with the soccer games.
Well, the soccer, we have about 25 different countries that display.
25 different countries playing soccer.
Yeah. Nigeria, Ghana, different countries, you know, they represent their national country.
Right.
And there's a competition where people play against each other, and there's a semi-final, and there's a UEFA Cup for the winner. But the spirit of the thing is the participation, not necessarily the winner, but the spirit. And we have a lot of children. It's a family-friendly function. We have a lot of fun for the children, canopy, ride fun for the family, and there's a lot of eating.
A lot of eating.
Part of the African culture is the hospitality. There's free food.
Right.
Last year we have about 8,000 to 10,000 people over there. There's no selling. There's a lot of free food, free drink. You can just go to your neighbor house and start eating. Either you know them or not, just eat.
Right. Free. There's free food. Yes. Yes. So. Right. And what happens is that you have different African organizations that represent different African countries. They'll have tents with traditional African foods from their countries. Is that correct?
Sure. There's authentic African food, like the Senegalese, they have the Senegalese food. The Ghanaian has the Ghanaian, the Sierra Leonean, the Gambian, the guys from South Africa, the guys from Zimbabwe. Everybody has their own different kind of food.
Right.
And everybody wants to taste their food, you know. It's a kind of bragging rights where we have everybody wants you to eat their food.
Right.
They will be calling you to come and eat, just like we do in Africa. People call you everywhere to come and eat their food. So it's going to be a lot of fun.
Right.
We invite a lot of people to show up. Last year we have about 8,000 to 10,000 people.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, 8,000 to 10,000 people came through. While I was there last year, I had a vendor booth also. I'll be back again this year as well. So explain to people, why is an event like this important, where you have continental Africans, you have Africans from the Caribbean, and you have African Americans coming together? Why is something like this important?
Well, it's important because they celebrate it's a show that celebrates our common unity, heritage. You know, where you see the authentic African spirits come to life, and there's a lot of African dancing. You know, the drums, the music. You know, and they invoke the spirit of the ancestor. You know, if you want to celebrate the ancestor, the soul, and bringing our people back together and celebrating the unity, you know, that first, and we decided to be on July 4th because a lot of our guys, you know, ladies, they go to work, and on that day we on vacation, you know, so we just decided which better way could we celebrate that together without everybody sitting home watching television.
Right.
And, you know, so we decided to all come together that every year. And it started a long time ago during the Kuma Young era. You know, we used to be on Stage Mind, and Asha came in, then we have Kwame, we have Dave Bean,
right,
and we have now Mike Dawkins, you know, we have a whole lot of these people participating. We have different leaders. Last year we have a presidential candidate from Nigeria.
Okay.
President, you know. This year, most of it is that everybody comes together and you see your old friends. As a matter of fact, this is the only time because people coming from Canada, Ohio, Chicago,
right,
New York, you know, there are people coming all the way from every part of the Northwest and in Miami, you know, everybody come together.
Exactly. So how can people get more information about this event?
Yeah, you can call this number at UECO 313-574-2607. 313-574-2607. That's the UECO number. They're able to talk to you, especially those of you who want direction, or you want to be a vendor,
right,
or you want direction, you know.
Right. So if you want directions, you want to be a vendor, call 313-574-2607. Okay. And then also the flyer, we put it on our Facebook fan page, the African History Network. I'm going to put the flyer on our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. I already sent it out in our email newsletter as well. And so you have representation from many African countries at this event. It's free and open to the public. Last year they had 8,000 to 10,000 people coming through. Now you're going to have African culture. You're going to have dance, food, sports, and music. Now what are some of the types of performances that you're going to have this year also?
Well, we have one of our guys, Gizio. He's an African and American. He's playing violin. Going to be one of the star attractions. And our young lady, Helen Meju, who's top African, all the way from Nigeria. We flew her in. She's going to be playing. She's going to do some solo dance, Afro beats, and some
solo dance, Afro beats. Okay. And where's she from? Where's she from?
Oh, the Helen Meju, she's coming in from Nigeria.
From Nigeria.
We have another local based Gilly. He plays a violin. He's an African American brother.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he plays in Greek town here. Like we saw him over there. And, oh yeah, this is kind of new, you know.
Exactly.
So Eliza Howell is over 96. Finkel, you know,
yeah, 23751. 23751 Finkel Avenue in Detroit. 23751 Finkel Avenue in Detroit, right at Telegraph Road. Yeah, right at Telegraph Road. That's Eliza Howell Park. Let me ask you this last question here. A lot of times when we talk about African Americans and we talk about continental Africans coming together, right? And this, I think this is really an important year for this to happen, Dr. Ola, because also many people are commemorating August 20th, 1619, and the 20th year of the 400th year anniversary of 29 Africans coming into Jamestown, Virginia. Okay, even though African people were already here going back long before that, but this is also known as the year of return. We know we have a lot of Africans who are making trips to Ghana, Senegal, things like this, right? Explain to people why. Okay, the question is, when oftentimes we have this conversation about continental Africans and African Americans coming together, you have people who push the notion that continental Africans don't like African Americans, and part of that whole, we have to realize that the image of African Americans largely has been negatively portrayed through the media and through movies and things like this that's been exported around the world. But talk about how, in general, continental Africans view, interact, respond to African Americans.
That's good. When I used to work in the United Nations, one of the things is that when I asked the guy why did the media portray us in a bad, negative way, and one of my consultants said, you know what, Dr. Ola, because you don't own the media.
Woo! He said, wait a second, hold on. That's a mic drop moment. Hold on. He said, because you don't own the media. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, because you don't own the media, then the media tell you whatever they want to have. You know, that's why we have a program like yours now, because you are in control, and you could call us to disabuse the mind of people and say the straight thing of what is true, the factual truth of what is happening. The issue of the African in the diaspora, we have about 700 million Africans descend in the whole universe. In the universe that we have about 8 billion people in the surface of the earth. 700 million of them are of African descent. And the fact is that they celebrate the relationship. There's a lot of us, there's a lot of uniformity among the Africans in the diaspora. So the coming together of the African is a celebration of the spirit of the Africanity. There is no doubt that
A celebration of the spirit of the Africanity. A celebration of the spirit of the Africanity. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, it's just like if you have a brother who was lost,
Yes.
it was even said in the Bible, oh, even this guy got 9,900 sheep and one of them was lost. And when he found that one we lost, he said, come, let's celebrate. You know, the idea is the African is one unity. And then when we have some of us who were taken away from us by force,
Right.
against their wish.
Right.
So when we now have the opportunity to rejoice together,
Yes.
you know, so it was because we didn't have the media. Now we have people like you are able to straighten us, tell us, no, we are all come together. There's nothing wrong with us. And then we think you want to try with us.
Right.
We are all unit. So unless people doesn't look into that how they are. I have 3 African American kids. My wife's an American.
Okay.
And I remember when I took them back to Nigeria where I am, a lot of my kids, they were following me every year. It was just like your big brother, your sisters. You just came back from the celebration. And that's what people like Andrew Young was talking about.
Andy Young?
Coming together. Oh, yeah, Andrew Young.
Andrew Young. Okay. Right.
You know, Muhammad Ali. These are people, and one of the things we do in UECO is the African tourism. We want everybody to talk about Africa, to see Africa in positive. And when you want to get married, you take a vacation, go to Africa, see it by yourself, and you'll be able to judge instead of other people telling you.
Right. See it for yourself. See Africa for yourself.
You see it by yourself and judge by yourself, not what people tell you. Just like if I'm coming to Detroit, people don't want to Detroit, say people shoot people over there. People want to shoot people in Detroit. You know, once in a while, you know. But most people in Detroit are peaceful people.
Right, that's true.
Especially in Africa. We got 5-star hotel, CNN, and all those places. Not in Africa. So we are looking for members too, or people who want to participate in our cultural action as well. You know, that's why they should call us at the UECO office.
Okay.
We call you have an opportunity to join us because you know that's something we also call in the technology of transfer. We have a lot of African Americans who are now retired.
Yes.
And that is what they need in Africa. We need this manpower technology. You know, a lot of engineers, a lot of teachers, a lot of doctors, a lot of lawyers. You know, don't forget that the slave trade raped Africa of the best intellectuals. So
you said the floodgates. What was that? What was that last sentence you said about intellectuals?
Yeah, they rape Africa of the intellectualism.
Okay.
You know, and that's why you see most of the strongest black people in the world are African American because they are the strongest ones who survive the transatlantic journey.
Right.
You know.
Right.
So, you know, Africans still need that manpower today. We need the manpower, we need technology transfer. Yeah, we got oil, but we need technology to extract the oil over there.
Right.
The telephone we are talking about today is extracted from Congo, the Silicon Valley. All those things, all these things are from Africa, but we need the brain power of the African Americans to push us to the. We are tired of people referring to us as a handout. We want to participate in the development of mankind. We talk about people like Dr. Charles Drew, who discovered blood.
Yeah, blood plasma. Yeah, Dr. Charles Drew.
Who participate in mankind development, and that is what Africa wants. That's what black men want. People, 800 million of us on the surface of the earth, like the Chinese, we are Africans, people, and we should be proud of our heritage. We are our clothes, we are our name, and celebrate ourselves. You know, respect our children, where the men play their role, really low role in the family, while the children respect their parents, and the men respect their wives, and stay home and raise their kids. The African culture is of importance in the African heritage. So that's why we have the celebration here, and it's an extension of the African root, where we celebrate every time, where the families stay together, because the families that pray together, they stay together.
A family.
We celebrate the Africanism enough.
You said a family that plays together stays together?
Yes, sir.
Okay, absolutely. Okay, so once again, everybody, this is taking place on Thursday, July 4th, 2019, 11 a.m. to 8 p.m. at Eliza Howell Park. ELIZAHOWELL. That's taking place. It's located at 23751 Finkel in Detroit. And it's right at Telegraph. It's a free event.
10 o'clock and from 10 o'clock to 7 o'clock.
10,
Yeah.
okay, 10 o'clock to 7 o'clock. Okay, 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. There'll be vendors there also. Be sure to visit the vendor table.
Authentic African wear.
Authentic African wear. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
There'll be a lot of vendors there. Go ahead.
Jewelry, and we have schools, we have coaches from different schools, and we have them go to HBS school, talk to our children. We have school like Ecos High Schools coming over to recruit or guide. We have guys who are Jovan, who are members, who play with the Detroit Lions, CFL. They are looking for students to recruit so that they could go, make them to go to college and have a full scholarship. We have coaches coming over there. All these kind of things that makes the black man and the black woman a proud contributor to the civilization of humanity.
Absolutely. All right. So once again, everybody, you can call 313-574-2607 for more information. I will see you all there. Be sure to visit the vendor table of the African History Network, and we'll put this information at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. All right, Dr. Ola, you have a good night, and I'll see you Thursday, okay?
Good night. Nice talking to you, Mike.
Okay, brother. Take care. Peace. All right. Okay, so that's Dr. Ola of UACO, United African Community Organization, talking about their 19th annual African Unity Festival. Okay. All right. So right before the break, and before I brought Dr. Ola on, I was talking about the some of the history of the GI Bill. All right, and how the GI Bill, the allocation of the resources, historically discriminated against African American GIs, African American veterans from World War II, 1.2 million African American veterans from World War II, and that helped to really increase the wealth gap in this country and change the trajectory of this country as well. Okay, I did a extensive presentation on this. Is at our YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP, and on our Facebook fan page, the African History Network, where I go deeper into this. But we're going to continue here for a few more minutes. Then we'll go to the phone lines, and in the second hour, we'll get into the Democratic presidential candidates debate and Senator Kamala Harris going after Vice President Joe Biden. I'm going to break this stuff down and deal with his comments dealing with segregationists and show how this whole thing is being mischaracterized, as I explained to you all last Sunday on the show. And it's gotten worse. And I don't understand why people just keep mischaracterizing it when the evidence is there. And if I know the evidence and I see this, then how is it other people are not seeing this? I still haven't been able to figure that out. Okay, so back to the GI Bill, right? So the GI Bill was officially called the Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944. All right, and President Roosevelt was hoping to avoid the what happened with the bonus march in 1932, when you had 20,000 unemployed veterans and their families who flocked in protest to Washington, D.C. So the American Legion, which is a veterans organization, successfully fought for many of the provisions included in the GI Bill. And the GI Bill gave servicemen returning from World War II access to unemployment compensation, unemployment insurance, low-interest home loans, and low-interest business loans so they can start businesses, low-interest home loans so they can get homes built. Many of these homes are going to be built in the newly formed suburbs, okay? And most importantly, funding for education, specifically college education. Now, by giving veterans money for tuition, living expenses, books, supplies, and equipment, the GI Bill effectively transformed higher education in America. Effectively transformed higher education in America. Before World War II, college had been an option for only 10 to 15% of young Americans. And university campuses had become known as a haven for the most privileged classes. Okay, so only 10 to 15% of young Americans were going to college, basically. But by 1947, now World War II ends in 1945. By 1947, 2 years after World War II ends, veterans made up half of the nation's college enrollment. You had a huge transformation in the student body at the colleges and universities in this country in just 2 years because of a government program, a government policy. Now, you had many Americans whose taxpayer dollars were paying for this government policy, but they weren't taking advantage of, they couldn't take advantage of the resources because they did not serve in World War II. But nonetheless, this is a policy that helped to transform America. So by 1947, veterans made up half of the nation's college enrollment. 3 years later, in 1950, nearly 500,000 Americans graduated from college. Compare that to 1939, when only 160,000 Americans graduated from college. So you see a huge change in the landscape of higher education in this country because of government policy. Politics is the legal distribution of scarce wealth, power, and resources, and the writing of laws, statutes, ordinances, amendments, and treaties, their adoption, interpretation, and enforcement. This is what we see here. They knew they had to provide resources for these veterans. They weren't talking about pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. They knew they had to provide resources. They provide low interest loans so they could buy homes. They didn't tell them pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. They provided low interest loans so they could go to college. They didn't say you could do it yourself, pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. They provided low interest loans so they can start businesses. They didn't run expressways through, wipe out thousands of their businesses, and then say, you need to engage in self-reliance and economic empowerment. When you study the history of this country, that's not what happened for another group of people. It was government policies that created all this. It was government policies that helped to create that middle class. Yeah, you had labor unions, but it was government policies that helped to do that. You had the U.S. Interstate Highway Act of 1952 and 1956 that was lobbied for by the auto industry, that ran 41,000 miles of interstate highway all throughout the country. It ran through about 1,600 African-American communities, knocking out thousands of businesses, knocking out thousands of homes. It created thousands of jobs for white men to build the roads that ran through our community and knocked out our businesses. They didn't tell them pull themselves up by their own bootstraps. Roosevelt was trying to avoid the protests from white Americans that took place during the Bonus March of 1932. So they understood they had to reallocate resources to this. So this is history. This is why this is so important. So as educational institutions opened their doors to this diverse new group of students, overcrowded classrooms and residences prompted widespread improvement and expansion of university facilities and teaching staffs. An array of new vocational courses were developed across the country because of this influx largely of white men because of government programs. See, they didn't call these handouts. They didn't call these handouts. Because of these government programs, this changed the landscape of higher education in this country. An array of new vocational courses were developed across the country, including advanced training in education, agriculture, commerce, mining, and fishing skills that had previously been taught only informally. The GI Bill became one of the major forces that drove an economic expansion in America that lasted 30 years after World War II. But this is a government program. Did anybody call this socialism? I'm just asking. I'm not advocating socialism. I'm just asking the question. Did anybody call this socialism? Only 20% of the money set aside for unemployment compensation under the GI Bill was actually given out, as most veterans found jobs or pursued higher education. Why didn't they tell these white men to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps? I just find that very interesting. When we actually study the history, how all this happened is not how you really think all this happened. It was government programs. It was a theft, then a redistribution of hundreds of millions of acres of land. It was the Homestead Act of 1862 that redistributed 245 million acres of land for over 100 years. You had taxpayers paying for this reallocation of land for over 100 years. The last allocation from the Homestead Act was allocated in 1988, 80 acres of land in Alaska. That's not me, that's history.com. What's history.com? The official website of the History Channel. Go read the article they have there about the Homestead Act of 1862. That's not me saying this. This is what they will tell you. This is what their historians will tell you. So only 20% of the money set aside for unemployment compensation under the GI Bill was given out, as most veterans found jobs or pursued higher education. Low-interest home loans. Low-interest home loans enabled millions of American families to move out of urban centers. Now, who moved into urban centers? When white people are moving out of urban centers because of the home loans that white men were able to get with the GI Bill, and they're moving out to the suburbs. They're not moving to more inner cities. They're moving out to the suburbs. Why? Also, you had the 1949 Federal Housing Act of 1949, which allowed people to get, white people to get low interest loans and move out to the suburbs. So you had white men who were veterans who were getting loans through the GI Bill. You have other white people who were being able to get loans because of the Federal Housing Act of 1949. Well, guess what? When African Americans say, well, we want a reallocation of our taxpayer dollars also, when we try to take advantage of these government programs, we say, well, hold on a second, 1.2 million of us served in World War II. Medgar Evers was one of them. Medgar Evers was there June 6, 1944 in Normandy with another 155,000 Americans who were fighting in Normandy, who landed in Normandy in France. They just celebrated, they just commemorated the 75th anniversary, but they didn't want to talk about Medgar Evers. He was there. He comes back to America to fight against segregation and Jim Crow. So when you had African American men who were fighting to be able to take advantage of what they earned, we were discriminated against. We're going to get to that in just a minute. But low interest home loans enabled millions of American families to move out of urban centers and buy or build homes outside of the city, changing the face of the suburbs. All this stuff is because of government policies. That's what people don't want to talk about. This wasn't about no pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. This was government policies that created the suburbs. It was government policies that built the interstate highways. It was government policies that created the whole redlining system that was used by the banking industry and the insurance companies. This was the federal government. So over 50 years, the impact of the GI Bill was enormous. When 20 million veterans and their dependents using the education benefits and 14 million home loans guaranteed. 14 million home loans were guaranteed by the GI Bill for a total federal investment of $67 billion. Anybody call this socialism? Reallocation of resources? Did anybody call this socialism? I'm just curious. Among the millions of Americans who have taken advantage of the GI Bill are former President George H.W. Bush, the father, former President Gerald Ford from the state of Michigan, former Vice President Al Gore, and entertainers Johnny Cash, Ed McMahon, Paul Newman, and Clint Eastwood. Read this article from history.com. What's history.com? Official website of the History Channel. This day in history, June 22nd, FDR signs the GI Bill. So then if we look at how did the GI Bill impact African American soldiers? There are 1.2 million African Americans who served in World War II. Surely they must have positively benefited from the GI Bill. Well, Eugene Burnett was one of these African American men who served in World War II. So Eugene Burnett saw a neat tract of houses in Levittown, New York. When he saw this, he knew he wanted to buy one of these houses. The year was 1949. This was 4 years after World War II ended. This is 5 years after the GI Bill was signed into law. This is the same year as the Federal Housing Act of 1949. And Eugene Burnett, a former World War II veteran, was ready to settle down in a larger home with his family. Because this was the whole baby boomer generation. These men are coming back home, starting families. They need larger homes. So they're moving out of the urban cities. They're moving out to the suburbs, and then African Americans are moving into these inner cities. And this is during the Great Migration, 1915, 1970. 6 million approximately African Americans moving from the South up north and out west. So the newly established Long Island suburb of Levittown seemed like the perfect place to begin their post-war life, Eugene Burnett and his wife and his family. One that Eugene Burnett hoped would improve with the help of the GI Bill, which was a piece of sweeping legislation aimed at helping World War II veterans like Eugene Burnett prosper after the war. But that ain't exactly what happened. We're coming up on a break here. We'll continue this on the other side of the break. Then we'll get into my dissection of this debacle of a presidential debate that happened in total mischaracterization of comments. And we talked about this last Sunday. I got into this last Sunday, and it's gotten worse. And nobody really wants to tell the truth. I can't figure out why. You listen to 910 AM, the Superstation of Future Radio. Call-in number is 313-778-7600. 313-778-7600 is the call-in number. When we come back from the break, we'll go to Robert, we'll go to Tom, and anybody else who calls in. You listen to the African History Network show. I'm Michael Imhotep. We'll be back in a few minutes.
Hi, I'm Hunter Ellis, and this is a...
All right, stand by, guys.
Hey, so that first video you sent me,
Yeah.
I've tried last like 20 minutes, tried pulling up on any other website. It is just not wanting to load on. I got the second one. I cannot get that one.
Just a second. Okay, the first video was
That was with Biden and Al Sharpton.
you try to refresh the screen?
Yeah, I've tried 1,000 times. I've let it sit there.
What happened?
It just says 0 out of 0 and won't even try to load it.
Even extreme temperatures are no match. You could spend over $100, or
You copied and okay.
And then you hit this.
$19.99 with free lifetime guarantee. Order now.
Wait, it never gave me an ad last time.
Okay.
It may be working now.
All right. All right, stand by, guys. Can you turn that down and hear a little bit also, John?
Atomic Beam USA.
All right, stand by, guys. We'll be back in a few minutes here.
Let's see if this works.
It should work.
Nope, it just goes right back to this black screen.
It goes back to the black screen.
Yep, and it just
I had that happen a couple times at home. I had to refresh the screen.
It says 0 out of 0. I can try refreshing again, but it just keeps.
Traffic, drive in bad weather, try to find a parking space, walk a half mile to class.
Let me see something here.
Learn online at Independence
I've tried looking up that up on YouTube and everything. I can't
Yeah, it's
find
not on
it.
YouTube.
Yeah, it's only on here.
Including a brand new laptop and
I've let it sit for 5 minutes. I've refreshed it.
Okay, that was clip 1.
Yeah. Clip 2 is fine.
We all love fried
Let me see
food, but the
something.
problem is all that
All right, stand by, everybody. We'll be back in.
Let me see
back
about
in a
clip
minute.
3.
Now there's the Cook Light Aero Fryer, an amazing kitchen miracle that uses air to fry instead of oil. So you
Yeah,
can have
every
the
other
same
video is
delicious
working
flavor and
fine, it looks
crispiness
like.
of deep frying using little or no oil.
Joining me now for his first cable
With up
news
to
sip.
70%
See, it's
fewer
playing on my
calories.
laptop.
Enjoy
Yeah.
crispy,
Ain't sure
delicious
why it's
fries with
playing.
little or no oil. Guilt-free onion rings, cheesy and delicious mozzarella sticks. Call now and bring the Cook Light Aero
Nope,
Fryer
clip
into
3,
your
0
home,
out of 0.
including the Cook Light Aero Fryer recipe book, the unique
Clip 3 is not playing?
No. So I got clip 2 good.
and stainless steel
All right,
extended
hold
ring.
on.
You'll get it all for 5 easy payments of $29.95. Be one of the first 500 callers and get this.
It's like it doesn't want to register that there's a video there.
value
Yeah.
yours free.
Try Cooklet Aero Fryer for 30 days. If you don't love it, send it back, but keep the 13-piece knife set.
Where's the, okay, here's the cord to plug in. I may have to run this off my laptop.
Go online to air2fry.com. That's air2fry.com.
All right,
Hey, this is Lisa Ray, and you're listening to 910 AM, the Superstation.
all right, yeah, turn that down some here. I'm still broadcasting on Facebook. All right, guys, stand by.
I'm
Coming
gonna throw
back
in a
from
30-second thing here. I'll let you get comfortable.
Are we back? How long before we come back?
20 seconds.
All right. All right, stand by, guys.
15. I've got clip 2. Do you want to do it all on the laptop?
What'd you say?
I've got clip 2 unless you want to do it all on the laptop.
No, I'm gonna do clip 1 off the laptop. We'll go to you for clip 2.
Okay, cool. You're going live in 2, 1.
Welcome back to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM, the Superstation, the Feature Radio. Hey, I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It is Sunday, June 30th, 2019. Give us a call, 313-778-7600. It's a call-in number if you have a question or comment. Right before the break, I was continuing our discussion dealing with the history of the GI Bill. This is a continuation from the discussion last week when I talked about the HR40 reparations hearing that took place on Wednesday, June 19th. And Dr. Julian Malveaux, who's an economist, African-American female economist, she talked about some of the various policies that have happened throughout history in this country that have maldistributed wealth, power, and resources to help create this wealth gap where the median household net worth of a white family is $171,000, median household net worth of an African-American family is $17,000. And she talked about the GI Bill. So, all right. So I'm going deeper into this. Okay, and then we'll get into our discussion dealing with the debate that took place as well, the presidential candidate debate. Okay. Very quickly here. Okay, let's go to the phone lines. Let's go to Robert in San Diego, line 1. Thanks for holding, Robert. Sorry for the delay. Welcome to the African History Network show. Go ahead with your question or comment.
Can you hear me, man?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, I got one comment, one question.
Go ahead.
One slight comment. I do want to say thank you for breaking down the GI Bill and the historical significance of it, because sociologists will say that the 1950s was the pinnacle of white supremacy, and I can see why it's because of the GI Bill. My comment, and my other two comments is this. I'm glad we had the reparations hearing. I hope more African Americans we answer the question, what does reparations look like? Because I know we have like misconstrued groups like ADOS trying to blame immigrants from everything. And,
trying to blame what?
Like ADOS, they're trying to blame immigrants for everything. Like
You said trying to blame immigrants?
Yeah, ADOS, they try to blame. And they don't reach out to the African diaspora as they should. Mm-hmm. Like and also try to blame immigrants. It's like newsflash. I wish black people understand that. Well, I'm not all black people. I wish these black people that they will understand that if they deport undocumented immigrants that they've been doing like since Barack Obama into Trump, that if they deport undocumented immigrants, unemployment for blacks would still be high, and white supremacy would still be in power. You know,
you said what? You know? Hold on, just say. Are you on a speakerphone?
No.
Okay, you said what would still be high? Unemployment. Okay, because you're dealing with discrimination. You're dealing with discrimination, and also Dr. William Spriggs has broken this down. Roland Martin interviewed Dr. William Spriggs on News One Now with Roland Martin 2 years ago. And Dr. William Spriggs broke this down as well. And he dealt with, and it's on Roland's YouTube channel, and he dealt with how And now I'll let you continue just a second here, but I just want to interject and explain what you're talking about. He dealt with how, immigrants, and especially undocumented immigrants, don't live everywhere that African Americans live in this country. And he talked about how even in areas where African Americans live and you don't have really undocumented immigrants, you don't have a high population of them, things like this, you still have a disproportionate amount of African Americans unemployed. And he was talking about the role discrimination plays into this, okay? And the other issue, the broader issue when it comes to immigrant labor, undocumented immigrants, things like this, is that people have to understand that white supremacy pits groups of oppressed people against each other to fight one another.
Exactly.
So white supremacy can exploit groups of oppressed people, keep them fighting each other. This is what's taking place. So you have Donald Trump, who loves attacking undocumented immigrants, but he has no problem exploiting their labor, and he has them working at his golf courses in New Jersey and New York that we know of. Okay, and at the same time, he's not really focused on going after corporations that exploit the labor of undocumented immigrants. Okay, go ahead, and then I got to get the time online too.
Exactly. I could go on, but I can go on. You know, I'll just say this because I really want to ask you something else. I'll just say this. You know, people need to understand that oppressed people, whether it be Fidel Castro helping out Angolan, or whether it be Marcus Garvey with his movement, also help out the African. And that also helped out funding the Kwame Nkrumah when he was younger. You know, but he also helped out the IRA when they were in their struggle. You know, oppressed groups need to help each other. But you know, about the Democrat debate, I just want to say that I saw it, and by the way, I just want to say right now, I'm a socialist, right? I'm a socialist.
Okay. What is socialism?
Huh?
What is socialism?
I believe that people, definitely. I believe people should get what their labor.
You should believe people should get what?
I believe people should get their labor. I believe the people should get the labor and the means of production. You know,
is that what socialism is? What is socialism?
That's my definition. Now I can't get to it right now. You know, because a lot of brothers can break down a lot. In the socialist community, there's a lot of arguments with that. You know, but the thing is that you know, the Democratic debate, it seemed that everybody was turning off like Bernie Sanders' ideas as far as health care and different
Medicare for all.
Yeah, Medicare for all. But the thing is that they couldn't. The thing is that he couldn't stand out because they're turning off his ideas, and so he just becomes a nail to pack. You know? Right. I think that he could come out on top, but it's going to be hard because you have like people. Because basically, establishment's coming after them. They're going to come after them with everything they got. And the thing is that Kamala Harris, her, first of all, even though I don't like her, congrats, that she just blew off Biden's campaign in that debate. He's done. To me, I don't think he can recover from that.
Why not?
Because he's arrogant and he's out of touch. He's arrogant and he's out of touch.
I don't think he was arrogant. First of all, she mischaracterized his statements dealing with segregationists, working with segregationists in the U.S. Senate. I'm going to get into that once we clear these calls and I get through with the GI Bill. She totally mischaracterized what he said. So did Cory Booker totally mischaracterize it as well.
But still, the whole busing thing is still racial in itself. Like you know. The whole busing thing was like him for against busing basically itself, because people forget like segregation didn't really end until Jimmy Carter came and he was for the busing and he did the busing.
Yeah, but Biden talked about how he was against forced busing. He was against busing being forced by the Department of Education. But at the same time, in 1973, a Gallup poll was done, and most African Americans were against busing also. See, the whole argument, I'm going to get into this. The whole argument about a 40-year-old busing policy is an incorrect argument. The reason why is because segregation is worse in our schools across the country now than it was back then, one. And two, the real argument was over equal funding, equal resources for African American schools. Kamala Harris didn't talk about that. Okay, I got to get to these other calls, man. But her whole argument is really problematic. All right, thanks, Robert, and call back next week. Okay, let's go to Tom. Hey, Tom, thanks for holding. Welcome to the African History Network show. Tell us where you're calling from.
Yeah, hey, how you doing? I'm calling over here from Shelby, a little north, but
Shelby, Michigan. Shelby, Michigan.
In my 60s now.
Can you hear me?
And I've seen, like in my own family, I have like the European part, and then I have my grandmother who grew up dirt poor in the South.
Okay.
She was part Indian. She was part black. So I have some of those genetics in me. Relatively minor, but they're still there. And then my dad's side is like the European part. So my point is, if the government didn't help me back in the 70s to go to school, I would not have gotten any education at all.
Go to school how?
Well, like I got like student loans and stuff like that. So
was it because you were part Native American, or just guaranteed student loans, Pell Grants, or student loans?
At that time, I applied, and there was a lot of student loans at that time, so I kind of lucked out there.
Okay, guaranteed student loans through the Department of Education.
Yes,
okay.
Right. And the point is, that's in the 70s. If you say, for example, if you were to look in the 1920s, nobody except the elite rich, the ruling class, would go to college.
Yeah, in general, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think that in some ways, yes, we need government assistance. There's the argument now that we have too much government and this and that, and that the large corporations are also joined at the hip of this big government. What I don't like, really upsets me, are these global corporations. Like, I don't know, before you would work for a corporation. Now, working for a corporation has never been an easy ride. And these guys were not always the best. But it's worse now, working for these global corporations and how they treat people in management and everything else. So I don't know. I think it's like we went from the 20s when there was the jazz age happening in New York, and the whites, the blacks, the gays, everybody got along together. That even happened during the Civil War. My grandmother was telling me some of that was even going on. But the point is, we're more segregated today because of the global corporations so the elite, the devil is back, but he's just in a new incarnation, and he's in a global outfit.
It was public policies coming largely from the federal government. Yeah, state policies also, but it's public policies largely coming from the federal government.
Yeah, and we need some of that. I think in some ways the government is over-bloated, but you really cannot blame that. You have to really look at the today's global economic elite. They are right in there with the government. I don't know if you would call it, I don't know, it's not really fascism. It's like a corporate state.
It's called capitalism.
Yeah, and that is not healthy for society either because it's on a global scale now.
Okay.
So
all right.
I don't really know what the answer. I do know that working for these corporations today is really a bad idea. I would like to get things more to a local level, because the way the global corporations are now, they are going to work you to death. They're hiring contingent workers. Use them and get them out.
Well, they have right to work laws like in Michigan, pushed by the Koch brothers through their nonprofit called Americans for Prosperity.
Yeah. And I think with this whole kind of a global mindset, I think it could potentially lead us into what I call the coming dystopia. So, for example, it's a funny word, is that eventually I believe we will become a complete government-controlled society, because we are kind of going down that road. Is everything bad about it? Not necessarily. But yes, there are a lot of things that are bad about it, but there are some good things about it. Like, I believe in mass transportation. These individual cars, if you look back in Detroit, probably the 1920s, 30s, those capitalists, they bought everything out. They took the railroad out of Detroit and everything else.
Streetcar system, 1956.
It was all political and economic and stuff like that, you know.
Right.
But I believe I can't say that I'm a Marxist completely because I like some things about it. But what I'm against is the abuses of present-day corporate capitalism. Should be absolutely ashamed of themselves.
Right.
Because they have finagled the government, bought these guys and gals out, control them, and then now they're doing this whole purposeful obfuscation of dividing everybody up. We're worse off today than we were 20, 30, 40 years ago.
All right, Tom, I got to get these other calls, get to these other topics. Thanks for calling. Keep listening. Okay, all right, so dealing with the GI Bill and Eugene Burnett, and we're looking at how the GI Bill discriminated against African American veterans after World War II. All right. So Eugene Burnett wanted to buy a home in Levittown in New York. All right. So when Eugene Burnett spoke with a salesman about buying the house that he saw using a GI Bill guaranteed home mortgage, the door to suburban life in Levittown slammed firmly in his face. The suburb was not open to African American residents. So Eugene Burnett's wife, Bernice, said it was as though it was not real. Look at this house. Can you imagine having this? And then for them to tell me because of the color of my skin that I can't be part of it. So the Burnetts were not the only African Americans for whom the promise of the GI Bill turned out to be an illusion. Even though their taxpayer dollars are paying for these resources. They could, and on paper they qualify, but they couldn't take advantage of the qualification. So though the GI Bill helped white Americans prosper and accumulate wealth in the post-World War II years, it did not deliver on that promise for veterans of color, specifically African Americans. In fact, the wide disparity in the GI Bill's implementation ended up helping drive the growing gaps in wealth, the growing gaps in education, especially higher education, college education, and civil rights between African Americans and white Americans. While the GI Bill's language did not specifically exclude African American veterans from its benefits, it was structured in a way that ultimately shut doors for the 1.2 million black veterans who have bravely served their country during World War II in segregated ranks. So there was a whole fear of black advancement, right? This is why this was. Keep in mind, politics is the legal distribution of scarce wealth, power, and resources, and the writing of laws, statutes, ordinances, amendments, and treaties, their adoption, interpretation, and enforcement. Well, what's racism? Racism is not calling people racial epithets. Racism is not hating people. Racism is a system of advantage and privilege distributed based upon race. Racism is a system of advantage and privilege distributed based upon race. Racism occurs when one race of people control the majority of the wealth, power, resources, privileges, benefits, land, access to education, access to opportunity, jobs, health care, media, etc., and they use that to marginalize, subordinate, and do harm to another race of people. So there was a fear of the advancement of African Americans. So when lawmakers began drafting the GI Bill in 1944, some Southern Democrats, these were called Dixiecrats, the Segregationists, the Dixiecrats, like Strom Thurmond, right? Who runs as a Dixiecrat for president in 1948, loses, thank God. And then because of the Civil Rights Act of 64, Voting Rights Act of 65, he leaves the Democratic Party. Where does Strom Thurmond go? He goes to the Republican Party. Because this is what a lot of the Southern Democrats, the Dixiecrats, did. They ended up leaving the Democratic Party and going to the Republican Party. Interesting. And so you had a whole party realignment. I did a 3-hour presentation. And we'll have that, we'll have that on our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. I did a 3-hour presentation dealing with the history of why African Americans switched from the Democratic Party to the Republican Party. And it goes back largely to the Lily White movement in 1928 and the Southern strategy implemented by the Republicans to win the 1928 presidency and to get Herbert Hoover elected as president. It wasn't because of the Civil Rights Act of '64, Voting Rights Act of '65. That's that history they talk about in barbershops. That's not why it happened. No, this goes back decades before that. And this goes back to issues and concerns and policies dealing with the African American community largely being ignored by Republicans and African Americans being pushed out of the Republican Party because of the Lily White movement of 1928, which was a movement in the Republican Party, the party of Lincoln, to ignore the issues and concerns of African Americans and push them out of the party so they can appeal to Southern Democrats, segregationists. This is what happened. There was a party realignment between the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. So when lawmakers began drafting the GI Bill in 1944, some Southern Democrats feared that returning African American veterans would use public sympathy for veterans to advocate against Jim Crow laws. The Jim Crow laws was about maintaining power and resources. To ensure that the GI Bill largely benefited white people, the Southern Democrats drew on tactics that had previously been used to ensure that the New Deal helped as few African Americans as possible. We'll continue this on the other side of the break, 9:10 a.m. the Superstation African History Network show. I'm Michael Imhotep. We'll be back in a few minutes.
Can you do me a favor?
Yeah.
Can you play something through your laptop?
Okay.
I want to make sure that this is all working correctly.
All right.
Just any audio.
I'm playing that right now.
A lot of tough stuff, and you not disagree with
So
it.
this is the clip. Yeah.
Cool.
This is the clip. All right, guys, stand by. We're coming back in a couple minutes here. Visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Okay.
I'm gonna go to the bathroom real quick.
All right.
I'll be right back.
Register for my new online course, Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school. Okay? And it meets again Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We do it live. All the sessions are recorded. If you miss any of it, you can go back and watch it over and over again. It's an 8-week, 16-hour online course. It's $80, regularly $130. It's about 36 hours of bonus content. Okay. And then also you can donate to the African History Network, paypal.me/the AHN show, paypal.me/the AHN show. Then also, or you can visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. It helps us keep doing the research, stay on the air, keep broadcasting, pay the bills, etc. Okay? Because I'm in Chicago. I got to pay to go to Chicago July 13th, that weekend, for the Black Agenda Tour with Michi X and Jice Johnson. Then I have to pay to go to Atlanta for the Black Homeschooling Conference, the weekend of the 20th. Okay, we'll be back in a couple minutes here. Who we have here? We have Faith. We got Latasha. How you doing, Latasha? Just a few of the people watching. Hey, do me a favor, on the Facebook Live broadcast, when you have the description, when you have the African History Network show, Michael Imhotep, right, the next line below that, have the topics. Underneath that stuff, then you can put the call-in number and all that. But people have to see as much information above the "See More" caption. That attracts more attention. Okay, we're coming back.
30 seconds.
You said 30 seconds?
Yeah.
All right.
All right, 15 seconds.
All right.
And then I have video 2. You got videos 1 and 3.
Okay, video 3 won't play either?
No.
All right.
2, 1.
Welcome back to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM, the Superstation, the Future Radio. I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It's Sunday, June 30th, 2019. Visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Register for my new online course. It meets on Wednesdays, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school. We do the class live, but all the sessions are recorded. So if you miss any of it, you can go back and watch it over and over again. You can watch from around the world. We deal with thousands of years of history. Visit AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Okay. You can also donate to the African History Network, PayPal.me/the AHN Show, PayPal.me/the AHN Show, or at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Click on the yellow donate button. And you can set up for a recurring donation also. That helps us to keep doing the research, stay on the air, finance our Sunday night show, pay the bills. It helps me when I have to travel to events. I'll be in Chicago Saturday, July 13th for the Black Agenda Tour with Michi X and Jice Johnson and hip-hop artist, actor David Banner. I'll be on the panel. And then visit the blackagendaontour.com, the blackagendaontour.com. And then that following weekend, the weekend of July 20th, I'll be in Atlanta for the Liberated Minds Black Homeschool and Education Expo. The Liberated Minds Black Homeschool and Education Expo. Okay, so we'll have all this information at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Okay. Let's get back to the GI Bill. Let's wrap up with this. Then I got to get into the debate that took place, and I may have to do a separate broadcast to deal with this debate and break this stuff down. Okay. So when there was a fear of African Americans advancing because of this reallocation of resources called the GI Bill. All right. When lawmakers began drafting the GI Bill in 1944, some Southern Democrats feared that returning African-American veterans would use public sympathy for veterans to advocate against Jim Crow laws. The Jim Crow laws were about maintaining power, suppressing the African-American vote, locking African-Americans out of jobs, city jobs, jobs downtown, things like this, locking African-Americans out of higher education as well, state colleges, state institutions, etc. All right, to ensure that the GI Bill largely benefited white people. The Southern Democrats drew on tactics that had previously been used to ensure that the New Deal helped as few African Americans as possible. During the drafting of the GI Bill, the chair of the House Veterans Committee, Mississippi Congressman John Rankin, a Southern segregationist Dixiecrat, which were the Southern Democrats. He played hardball and insisted that the program be administered by individual states instead of the federal government. This allowed the individual states, like a lot of these Southern states, right, to discriminate against African American veterans. He got his way. Congressman John Rankin of Mississippi was known for his virulent racism. He defended segregation, opposed interracial marriage, and had even proposed legislation to confine, then deport every person with Japanese heritage during World War II. When the GI Bill came to a committee vote, he stonewalled the bill in an attempt to gut another provision that entitled all veterans to $20 a week of unemployment compensation for a year, because he didn't want these benefits to go to African American veterans, even though they risked their lives, shed their blood for this country. Mississippi Congressman John Rankin knew this would represent a significant gain for black Southerners. So he refused to cast a critical proxy vote in protest. The American Legion ended up tracking down the congressman who had left his proxy vote with Congressman John Rankin and flying him to Washington to break the deadlock vote. Now, President Roosevelt signed the Servicemen's Readjustment Act into law on June 22, 1944, ostensibly known as the GI Bill, only weeks after the D-Day offensive began on June 6, 1944. This ushered into law sweeping benefits for veterans, including college tuition, low-cost home loans, and unemployment insurance. Now, what impact did this have on African-American veterans? So, from the start, African-American veterans had trouble securing the GI Bill's benefits. Some could not access benefits because they had not been given an honorable discharge from the military, and a much larger number of African-American veterans were discharged dishonorably from the military than white veterans. Now, veterans who did qualify, African-American veterans who did qualify for the GI Bill could not find facilities that delivered on the GI Bill's promise. Black veterans in a vocational program at a segregated high school in Indianapolis were unable to participate in activities related to plumbing, electricity, and printing because adequate equipment was only available to white students. Simple intimidation kept others from enjoying GI benefits. In 1947, 2 years after World War II ended, for example, a crowd hurled rocks at African-American veterans as they moved into a Chicago housing development. Thousands of black veterans were attacked in the years following World War II, and some were singled out and lynched. Though Congressman John Rankin of Mississippi had lost the battle to exclude African-American men from the Veterans Affairs unemployment insurance, it was doled out inequitably, okay? But men who applied for unemployment benefits were kicked out of the program if any other work was available to them, even work that provided less than the wages that they were getting through the unemployment insurance. Southern postmasters were even accused of refusing to deliver the forms, the forms that black veterans needed to fill out to receive their unemployment benefits. African-American veterans and civil rights groups protested their treatment, calling for protections like the black involvement in the Veterans Affairs and non-discriminatory loans. But the racial disparities in the implementation of the GI Bill had already been set into motion. As the years went on, white veterans flowed into newly created suburbs where they began amassing wealth in skilled positions, but African American veterans lacked those options. The majority of the skilled positions were given to white workers. Okay, so check out we ran out of time here, so I got to get to this next topic. Visit our YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP. I went deep into this history, went further than I have time to go into now. Watch that video. It's also on our Facebook fan page, the African History Network, the African History Network. Check out the articles from history.com, how the GI Bill's promise was denied to 1 million black World War II veterans, and also FDR signs GI Bill. That's at history.com, the official website of the History Channel, okay? And then you can read Black Labor, White Wealth by Dr. Claude Anderson, read The Case for Reparations by Ta-Nehisi Coates. He talks about this some as well in the housing discrimination that took place also specifically in Chicago after World War II. The Case for Reparations at theatlantic.com, theatlantic.com. And then also read How White Folks Got So Rich, The Untold Story of American White Supremacy. Read that book as well. Okay, now let's switch gears here. So the Democratic debate that took place on Tuesday, right? So during the second night of Thursday, it was Wednesday and Thursday. During the second night on Thursday, June 27th, 2019, Democratic presidential candidate debate, many people are talking about Senator Kamala Harris, Democrat from California, attacking Vice President Joe Biden over busing, a 40-year-old busing policy, and working with quote-unquote segregationists when he was in the U.S. Senate. She said she wanted to talk about race as the only black person on stage. Now, she's being attacked. You have a social media campaign attacking her ethnicity and saying she's not black. Her mother is from India. Her father is Jamaican. She is black. But black and a black consciousness are two different things. Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas is black, but he lacks a black consciousness. And one of the arguments that has been going on for months with Senator Kamala Harris is that even though she's black, sometimes it seems like she's only black when it's convenient. So on stage, Kamala Harris said she wanted to talk about race as the only black person on stage. So I thought she was going to talk about reparations, since the HR40 hearing was the week before on Wednesday, June 19th. I thought she was going to talk about the fact that Senator Joe Biden has not endorsed HR40. Now, he supports the gathering of evidence and dealing with the legacy of slavery and things like this, but he has not come out formally endorsed HR40. So I thought she was going to talk about that. Or I thought she was going to talk about her black agenda. Because when she was talking to black people on the Tom Joyner Morning Show, with Tom Joyner and Sybil Wilkes and Roland Martin, she said that she would have a black agenda, and she talked about the need for a black agenda, and she said that all of the candidates should have a black agenda. So I thought she was going to talk about her black agenda. When she was on the Breakfast Club, she talked about she would have a black agenda. When she's talking about listening to Tupac and all this stuff, she was talking about the need for a black agenda. So when she talked about she wanted to talk about race, and she's the only black person on stage, I thought either she was going to talk about reparations, which impacts black people, African Americans, or I thought she was going to talk about her black agenda, because she said she would have one. But then she attacked Biden on his position on busing over 40 years ago. Now, when the hell was the last time you heard African Americans talk about the need for more busing? Because one, busing was a failed program. Two, most African Americans were against busing. This is something that was not talked about that night. This is something she didn't want to mention. Most African Americans were against busing. So let's look at the article. I'm going to give you some of these articles here so you can go do this research, right? Because we can't be hoodwinked, bamboozled, led astray, and run amok. So look at the article from, let's see. Okay, this one here from the Washington Post. Biden takes flack on race and busing, but his views may still mirror America's. Biden takes flack on race and busing, but his views may still mirror America. Mirror America's. This is from June 28, 2019, Washington Post. It talks about how the year that Joe Biden entered the U.S. Senate in 1973, Gallup did a poll and asked Americans whether they thought busing children from one neighborhood to another was the best means of integrating the nation's public schools. 5% of those surveyed said they favored that approach. 5% of those surveyed. Broken into racial groups, 4% are whites and only 9% of African Americans say they supported busing. Most African Americans were totally against busing. But that didn't come up. But see, once again, this deals with a black consciousness. Because if you got a black consciousness, you understand that the real fight for Brown versus Board of Education was over resources. We wanted equal funding for our schools in our communities, like white people have for their schools in their community. Now, yes, you should be able to go to the state institution. Yes, you should be able to go, if you got to pass 3-4 white schools to walk 10 miles to a black one, we should be able to go to the one closer to your home. But the real fight was over resources, not busing. That's not what we wanted. We wanted our children to be able to go to school in our neighborhoods where we knew teachers were there who lived in our communities. Our parents grew up with the teachers. Those teachers went to our grocery stores. They went to our churches, okay? And those teachers loved them. We wanted equal resources. We didn't want dilapidated schools. We didn't want old, outdated textbooks that were hand-me-downs from the white schools. We were fighting for equal resources. We weren't fighting for busing. And when you look at the statistics today, and this morning on David Gurr's show, David Gurr, MSNBC, they talked about this, and they talked about how the schools are more segregated today than ever. Busing is a failed program. So I thought she was going to talk about reparations or a black agenda, but she wanted to talk about a 40-year-old busing policy when most black people were against busing. But this is the difference between being black and having a black consciousness. So what she didn't tell us was that most African Americans in the 1970s were against busing, as the Gallup poll showed. All right. So she talked about how hurt she was that Joe Biden would praise segregationists who worked against busing and would not want her in the U.S. Senate. But what she didn't tell you is that the 2 U.S. senators that Joe Biden talked about were 2 Southern segregationists who were Democrats. He's talking about being able to work with people that you vehemently disagree with and get bills passed. Just like Senator Kamala Harris and Cory Booker had to work with Donald Trump to get the First Step Act passed that they keep talking about. And they vehemently disagree with Trump. Trump is a Republican. Biden is talking about having to work with these guys who were Democrats. And this is what people don't want to talk about. Reverend Al Sharpton is not saying this. Cory Booker is not saying this. Senator Kamala Harris, when she had a little dramatic Academy Award winning speech Thursday night, they're not saying. Biden was talking about working with Democrats who he disagreed with. But then he also said he ran against the segregationists and defeated them. Okay, so I want to go to this clip here. This is from Politics Nation, MSNBC. Oh, no, this was from MSNBC. Reverend Al Sharpton interviewed him, but it wasn't Politics Nation. This is from June 23rd, 2019. The name of this clip this is Exhibit A. This is Exhibit A. The name of this clip is Joe Biden Responds to Controversy Over His Comments About Segregationists. This is before the debate, okay? I talked about this clip last Sunday, but I don't think I played it, all right? Let's go to this clip. I mean, to turn it up in here so they can hear it.
Internal fights in the staff for same-sex marriage and a lot of tough stuff. And you and I disagreed in the 90s, and I said, wow, this Biden is a real go-to-the-mat kind of fighter. And this week you got into it about a statement you made about racists and segregationists. And don't you understand some of the hurt feelings there? You called Cory Booker.
Sure I do.
And you have Mayor de Blasio and others calling you to apologize. Many things I've said that I didn't intend, Mrs. King said to me, you can't say things that hurt people. It hurts when you talk about boy. It means something different to us. It hurts when you call a racist like you normalize. That's not the Biden I got to know. Don't you understand?
No, I do fully understand. That's not what I said, though. They didn't print the whole deal. You know what I mean? The context of this was totally different. And by the way, the fact of the matter is, I ran against all those folks. I got on the Judiciary Committee to defeat the man who headed the committee. I'm the guy that extended the Voting Rights Act 25 years, not 5. We finally got to the point when I was a senior member of the Democratic on the Judiciary Committee to get 98 votes to extend the Voting Rights Act. Let me tell you something. You've got to deal with what's in front of you. And what was in front of you was a bunch of racists, and we had to defeat them. And as I said in that statement, that the fact of the matter is the meanest man in the world I've ever dealt with in the United States Senate was a guy from Georgia named Herman Talmadge. And I included Jim Eastland. And Jim Eastland, and so, but this is, I do understand the consequence of the word boy. But it wasn't said in any of that context at all.
But you understand, they would never call me son. They would only call me boy.
But they called Teddy Kennedy boy. That was the distinction. The reason he called me senator is to demean me more because son, because he said, I'm not even qualified to be in the Senate. I'm not old enough. I'm a kid. Mm-hmm. I'm a kid.
To those that are listening.
Pause it right there.
What's up?
Pause it right there. Put me back on. Okay, so this is Joe Biden explaining this to Sharpton last Sunday. I talked about this last Sunday on my show. This is on MSNBC. So why do people act like they have amnesia or can't understand English? The whole context of what Biden was saying. And now if you disagree with Biden on actual policies, votes he took, things like that, okay, that's fine. But we can't mischaracterize what people say. Especially when you got 18 million people watching live on MSNBC and 9 million streaming on the internet. And this was what took place. He's explaining to the Sharpton, he said, wait a second. Now, for those that don't know, Senator Ted Kennedy was white. He's saying they called Senator Ted Kennedy boy. And he said Senator James Eastland specifically called me son. This ain't had nothing to do with black men being called boys, as Cory Booker was talking about how he was so hurt. This little cream puff Talking about he's so hurt over the usage of the word boy. You talk about you live in the hood and you so hurt over the usage of the word boy. That's not even what this was about. Biden was talking about being able to work with people he totally disagreed with to get bills passed. And these two guys were Democrats. So what, he not going to work with Democrats? And he's talking about, I defeated the racists also. But he was talking about how he was called son because Senator James Eastland, Democrat from Mississippi, who was known as the mouth of the white South, didn't think Biden was old enough to be in the Senate. That's why he called him son. This didn't have anything to do with black men being called boy. But people wanted to interject this into the conversation. And that's not even what it was about, and totally mischaracterized. So if we look at the article from Politico.com, this is one of the first articles that dealt with all of this. June 19th, 2019 from Politico.com, entitled Biden's 2020 Rivals Condemn Remarks About Segregationists. Biden's 2020 Rivals Condemn Remarks About Segregation. This is Exhibit B, okay? And I guess the video I just played is Exhibit C. And we got Exhibit D coming up in a minute here. But an excerpt from this article says Biden cited the late Senators James Eastland of Mississippi and Herman Talmadge of Georgia at a fundraiser in New York on Tuesday night to back up his claim that one of his greatest strengths was to bring people together. Now, he wasn't praising these segregationists, as people mischaracterize him saying. He wasn't praising these segregationists. He said, quote, I was in a caucus with James O. Eastland, okay? And he said this briefly imitating the senator's southern drawl, according to poll reports. He said, quote, he never called me boy. He always called me son. Now, he's told that story before, and he said that previously he said he never called me senator. He called me son. But this is what he's talking about in this context. He called, now you had the other senator from Georgia, Senator Herman Talmadge from Georgia, another segregationist Dixiecrat. He called Herman Talmadge one of the meanest guys he ever knew, but said, quote, at least there was some civility. We got things done, end quote. What he was talking about in the broader context is that in the Senate, even though you totally disagreed with people and didn't like them, you could still work with people and get bills passed. This is what he's talking about. He's comparing that to the Senate today, where the Republicans largely look at the Democrats as the enemy, and the Democrats largely look at the Republicans as the enemy. And it's much harder to get bills passed. This is the context that he's talking about. Okay, he's not talking. He talked about how he was against the segregationists, but you could at least get bills passed. But the two segregationists he's talking about are Democrats, and nobody wants to say, wait a second, he's talking about working with Democrats. He went on to say in the article from Politico, quote, we didn't agree on much of anything. But today you look at the other side, referring to Republicans, and you're the enemy. We don't talk to each other anymore. This is what he's talking about. So he said he knew many people in his party thought that his attitude made him too, quote unquote, old-fashioned to be the Democratic nominee to take on Donald Trump in 2020. He said, well, guess what? If you can't reach a consensus in our system, what happens? It encourages and demands the abuse of power by our president. Now, Senator Kamala Harris was on Morning Joe the following morning, and she was interviewed by a panel. She talked about how she worked with Paul Ryan, who's a Republican, who she disagrees with on a lot of things to get things done. But then she talked about Biden praising segregationists. He wasn't praising segregationists. The whole argument is mischaracterizing what he said. So let's go into this deeper. Many people accuse Senator Kamala Harris of being black only when it's convenient. This has been going on for months. This didn't just start with this attack a couple of days ago. When she became Attorney General in California, now she is black. I said this from the beginning. She is black. Her father is from Jamaica. Her mother is from India. She is black. But so is Clarence Thomas. There's a difference between being black via ancestry and black as far as thinking, a consciousness. So when she became Attorney General in California, she was called Indian American, as many of the headlines at the time described her. On Friday, Joe Biden was speaking at an Operation Push dinner. He defended his civil rights record. He was then attacked by Senator Cory Booker over a comment Biden made about, quote, that kid wearing a hoodie may very well be the next poet laureate and not a gangbanger, end quote. But Cory Booker then attacks him over the usage of the term hoodie. Some more nonsense. Okay? And go back and watch, go back and listen to the show that I did last week where I broke this down and talked about Cory Booker. All right, so if we look at the, I want to squeeze in one more article here, then we'll go to the, this next clip, right? Look at the article from the Washington Post, February 2nd, 2019. It's entitled, I Am Who I Am, Kamala Harris, daughter of Indian and Jamaican immigrants, defines herself simply as American, right? So on page 4 of this article, because I printed it out, it's 7 pages. On page 4 of this article, let's back up to page 3. It talks about how many people thought she was African American and didn't know that her mother was Indian, from India. And it talks about how her lack of public focus on her heritage has left many people, even in her home state of California, unaware of her multiracial background. Most people assume she's African American, and even some friends did not know she was also Indian. So they talk about, they quoted Matthew Davis, a San Francisco lawyer and classmate of Kamala Harris's at the University of California, Hastings College of Law, where they graduated in 1989. He said, I had no idea, quote unquote. He said, quote, even though we were good friends, I never really heard her talk much about her personal life, end quote. Now, her parents were civil rights activists and all that. I understand that. That's fine. And she grew up, learning about Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass. She grew up immersed in black culture. That's true. She talked about how her mother adopted black culture and immersed her and her sister Maya in it. That's true. But it was only, so Matthew Davis said, even though we were good friends, I never really heard her talk too much about her personal life. Okay? Now, it was only when she was sworn in as district attorney in 2004 in California, 15 years after they graduated from law school, that Matthew Davis learned Kamala Harris was half Indian. He said, quote, she introduced me to her mother, and that was the first time I knew, end quote. He said it was a sense of pride for her, but I didn't get the sense that it was the way she defined herself, okay? So the article goes on to talk about how even now, Kamala Harris still doesn't seem fully at ease discussing her personal heritage. So she did an interview with Good Morning America. Good Morning America comes on Monday through Friday, seen by millions of people. This was right after she announced she was running for president, okay? In her first campaign stop after announcing her bid for president on Good Morning America on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day, Kamala Harris appeared on her old Howard University campus to take questions. Howard University, HBCU. The reporter asked her, quote, you're African American, but you're also Indian American, end quote. She responded, indeed. He asked, the reporter, not sure male or female, asked, how do you describe yourself? She responded, did you read my book? How do I describe myself? I describe myself as a proud American. So this was, now, you're being interviewed by Good Morning America. Or you're on Good Morning America. This is an opportunity to say you're a proud black American. You're a black American. You can say African American, but people dispute that. I'm not getting to that. I don't have enough time to get to that. Dealing with immigrants coming here being classified as African American, I don't have time to get to that argument. But this is how she chose to describe herself. She said it with a smile, but with an quote unquote end of conversation firmness. Read this entire article. Okay, I don't have time to get this is 7 pages. I don't have time to get into all this. I am who I am, Kamala Harris, daughter of Indian and Jamaican immigrants, defines herself simply as American. That's the title. So what some people have been saying for months, they're not saying they don't like her. Personally, I don't know her, but personally, you know, I like her. She's sharp. She's smart. Wouldn't want to be prosecuted by her. But this is a question. This is a legitimate question people ask. They say, wait a second, it seems like she's just black when it's convenient. When you had an opportunity to talk about reparations on the debate stage, when you had opportunity to talk about your black agenda that you said you would have when you talked to Tom Joyner on the Tom Joyner Morning Show when you're talking to black people, or when you were talking on the Breakfast Club talking to black people, you wanted to talk about a 40-year-old busing policy, and busing has failed, and most African Americans were against busing. So we'll talk about this some more next week in the subsequent weeks. We're running out of time here, okay? This next clip, we'll get to the other clip. How much time we have, John?
3 minutes.
3 minutes. All right. Let's go to this next clip. Let's get into this. You got it queued up? Second clip 2? Let's go to this clip 2.
It was hurtful.
No, John. Cue it up about a minute in. Go about a minute in.
And you've been not a
right there.
supporter of civil rights, you've been a leader of it as chair of the Congressional Black Caucus and others. How do you deal with the questions about Joe Biden, your candidate, not willing to apologize for the boy-son statement that I tried to get him to deal with last week in South Carolina, and his response to Kamala Harris that in effect said that he did not want to see the federal court intervene in local decisions? I mean, how does that reconcile with the civil rights movement for the last 50 years that needed the federal government to step in to protect people against local states and local county governments that may have been doing things that are discriminatory?
Well, thank you, Reverend Al, for that question. It gives me a chance to really clean it up a little bit. First of all, the Vice President's record is very clear that he's always supported the federal government stepping in when states, local governments, or municipalities or school boards acted in a manner that justified or enacted segregation. And he was for busing in those instances. But the bigger question, and I think what everybody alluded to, was the old states' rights arguments. He has never been for states' rights. So whether it was the Voting Rights Act that he extended for 25 years that let the federal government sue states and counties and voter offices that discriminated, whether it was the legislation that he passed so that
you got about
the
45
federal
seconds.
government, the Department of Justice, could sue police departments that had a pattern and practice of violating people's civil rights, especially
pause it there. Okay, guys, we're running out of time. Watch that full clip. Now, this is from June 29th, 2019. Okay? June 29th, 2019. This is after Al Sharpton interviewed Biden, and Biden told him face-to-face and explained this whole thing. So why is Sharpton still talking about boy and segregationists? Because that's not even the context in which Biden was talking about. The name of this clip, Biden, Sanders, Surrogates Talk Candidates Debate Performance. This is from Politics Nation. It's at msnbc.com. The full clip, about 13 minutes. That was Representative Cedric Richmond, who is the co-chair of Joe Biden's campaign. Watch that full clip. We'll get into this next week because you have people who are not really telling the truth and totally mischaracterizing what we're saying to score political points. And we have to ask the question, well, what's behind all this? If you disagree with some policies of Biden, some votes that took place, that's fine. Let's deal with that. But we can't mischaracterize what people are saying. Just like at the same time, we can't say, I'm against people attacking Kamala Harris, saying she was not born in this country, or saying she was not black. She is black. But there's a difference between being black and black consciousness. Clarence Thomas is black. There's no doubt about that. But he doesn't think black. 9:10 a.m. the Superstation. Thanks for tuning in. Remember, right now is correct wrong behavior. It's not over till we win. The African History Network show. I'm Michael Imhotep. Visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Wakanda forever. Stay tuned with Pastor Mo. We'll talk to you next week. Peace.
This rocky road is amazing.
All right, guys, we got to get out of here. Talk to y'all later. Register for my online course. Visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. I'll post a link to this clip. All right, thanks.